Well, many MPs will be looking forward to President Zelensky's address to Parliament this afternoon. But first, the normal duties of the day. Rishi Sunak has to get through PMQs. He's only got 6 minutes to get from number 10 down to the House of Commons. I will bring you the images when he does leave. But first of all, I'm joined in the studio by our MPs panel. For the Conservatives, we have Theresa Villiers, former Cabinet Minister for Labour, Stephen Morgan, and the Shadow Minister for Schools. And also for the Liberal Democrats, we've got Alistair Carmichael, who's the party's Home Affairs for Justice and Northern Ireland spokesperson as well. Theresa Villiers, to you first of all, we were going to talk very in detail really about the Cabinet reshuffle yesterday, but first, what about this visit today? How significant is it, do you feel?
I think it's a hugely significant reminder of the traumas being suffered by Ukraine. And I think we can be proud that as a country and as a government, we've been foremost in providing lethal weapon support for Ukraine and holding together that international coalition to support Ukraine in its valiant attempt to defend itself from Russian aggression.
Stephen, for Labour, President Zelenskyy is obviously meeting the Prime Minister and spending time with him and the Foreign Secretary, also meeting the King. We understand that there is going to be a brief visit with Keir Starmer. Is this the first time the two will have met?
Well, I think it's really important that we remain united in standing alongside the people of Ukraine to end this war. And I know that there's been consensus in Parliament so far. We need to make sure that we move beyond ad hoc announcements and in a long-term strategy to secure the future of Ukraine. I'm desperate to see that. I know parliamentarians will raise that later today.
Alistair Carmichael, do you stand squarely behind the Prime Minister, the Lib Dems, in terms of their support for Ukraine and the amount of money that the UK is sending to Ukraine?
We absolutely do, and I think on occasions, we've been in a position to say, oh, look, you should be doing more, you should be doing it faster, and that's the role that a responsible opposition party can take. Understand, Britain has been able to take a leading role on the world stage at this time, but we've been able to take that leading role because we've maintained the agreement, the consensus beyond the political parties. And, at a time when so many of the political influences in our country at the moment are nationalist and inward-looking, being able to remind the country that actually we're still a major player on the world stage, that we can be a force for good when we pull together, I think is quite an important lesson to draw from this.
Theresa Villiers, there will be some, though, who say that the sums that we are sending to Ukraine and the level of support that we are giving to Ukraine is too much. I mean, when we saw President Zelenskyy arrive at number 10, we heard the applause from inside. Is there a danger, do you think, that the government is being slightly dazzled by him?
Yeah, it is a huge amount of money at a time when the public finances are under strain. So this is difficult, but I think it is remarkable that we've got this really strong political consensus, and I think that consensus covers much of the general public as well. It is not easy doing what we're doing, but it is the right thing to do, and I'm afraid it will require more resources before this conflict is finally at an end.
OK. We should also touch on domestic matters. We did have this cabinet reshuffle yesterday. What did you make of it? Do you think it's actually achieved anything?
Well, I am a particular enthusiast about the creation of a Secretary of State for Science and Technology. This is absolutely crucial for our future economic success. And I know it's a priority for the Prime Minister, which is why he wanted that dedicated new department in Whitehall. And that's why also spending on R&D and investment in these kind of projects is being protected despite the difficult fiscal situation we were talking about earlier.
Stephen Morgan, do you agree that it is the right emphasis that the government should be looking at this now, and the creation of this kind of department is something quite forward-looking?
I think what we saw yesterday was a Prime Minister that just has sticking plaster politics for our country. He's tinkering around the edges. We're moving the deck chairs and the Titanic's sinking. And I think what we've got is a Prime Minister who's weak and a divided party that aren't tackling the issues that this country faces.
You talk about the Titanic there. No surprise, perhaps, that you brought that up, because Lee Anderson, who's the new Tory vice chair, is somebody who said that the government was like abandon the Titanic just a short while ago. What do you make of his appointment? Well,
Lee speaks his mind. He's a great guy. I wouldn't necessarily agree with all his statements on every issue, but I know that he's a phenomenal campaigner and he's absolutely determined to ensure a Conservative victory next time round. But his appointment is just...
Is the problem that he is a campaigner and he's just been taken on to assuage, those who are concerned about losing seats in the Red Wall? We had one Northern Tory MP yesterday tell Sam Coates Lee Anderson is everything that's wrong with the Conservative brand presently.
I don't believe that is true for a moment. I mean, Lee demonstrates a journey from Labour to the Conservatives. He is someone who decided he wanted to change things in his community, and he decided the best way to do that was to join the Conservatives, and now he's the MP, and I think he's doing great work for his constituents.
The Titanic line just doesn't work, because if you're going to have a band, you've got to have people playing in harmony, and right at the moment in the Cabinet, you would struggle to find enough people to play in harmony to bring a string quartet together. That's the root cause of the problem. Rishi Sunak has no authority, and he is trying to lead a party that is going in different directions all the time. The creation of a science and technology department, yeah, good, worthy thing to do, but it's hardly the radical reboot that this government needs. And the reason is that he doesn't have the political authority to do the things he needed to do. If he did, Dominic Raab would not be in a job this morning. The fact that Dominic Raab stays there shows the weakness of Rishi Sunak, because he does not have the authority to sack him.
Would you like to have seen Dominic Raab perhaps moved or at least suspended while this investigation continues?
No, I think these allegations have to be investigated, and once that process is finished, then a decision will be made on Dominic's future.
Well, the Prime Minister's on his feet. We're going to pause you all. Thank you all very much.
In the United Kingdom today. It is a testament to the unbreakable friendship between our two countries, and I'm proud that we are expanding the training for Ukrainian forces to include jet pilots and Marines, and ensure that Ukraine has a military able to defend its interests today and into the future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Slava Ukraini. President Zelenskyy, we salute you. This year, the start will be made to the rebuild of Kettering General Hospital. Northamptonshire Police will reach 1,500 police officers, the highest number ever in its history. And Kettering is set to become one of the best connected towns for ultra-fast broadband in the whole country, thanks to City Fibre's investment. Together with the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation and tackle the NHS backlogs, isn't it time to tackle head-on the doom and gloom peddled by those who want this country to fail? And to be far more optimistic about the many good things happening in Kettering and across the country.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm glad to hear of all the successes in his constituency, especially the redevelopment of Kettering General Hospital, something I know my honourable friend has been campaigning on tirelessly for years. But he's right, this government will continue to focus on delivering the country's priorities.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 11,000 people have died as a result of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and that number is sadly rising. And I know many families here in the UK will be anxiously awaiting news. I'm sure I speak for the whole House in saying our hearts go out to each and every victim and their families, and we must do all we can to support the rescue and recovery effort. Mr. Speaker, this House is honoured to be addressed today by President Zelenskyy. From the outset of the war, he has symbolised the heroism, the resolve and the bravery of his people. The Prime Minister and I joined this House together in 2015. We've lived through important moments in our domestic and international politics. But none of those experiences compares to the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that right across this House, it is vital that we all continue to stand together in full support of Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I first join with the honourable member for paying our respects and thoughts to the people of Turkey and Syria, particularly those affected by the earthquake and the first responders who are doing such a valiant job. The House will be reassured to know that we are in touch with the Turkish and Syrian authorities and providing all assistance that they have required of us, including 77 search and rescue responders that arrived yesterday and have already begun work. And I spoke to the President yesterday to ensure that we are in close communication. And can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments on Ukraine. It's something that not only the whole country can be proud of, but the entire House can be proud that we came together to stand by Ukraine when the moment mattered, and that we will continue to stand with them united as one Parliament Parliament and one United Kingdom.
Just for the record, he is the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, because every time Putin has been appeased, he's been back for more. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that across this House we must speak with one voice and say this terrible conflict must end with the defeat of Putin in Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, our objective remains to ensure a Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression cannot be seen in any way to have been successful, and that's why we have accelerated and increased our support militarily for Ukraine this year. It's a decision that I took as Prime Minister. Today we are going even further, not just having provided Challenger tanks and being one of the first countries to do so, which catalysed the provision of tanks from other nations as well, but also today to move to start training Ukrainian Marines in the advanced capabilities they will need to mount further offensive, but also to train their pilots on advanced combat aircraft. So the House can be reassured we will continue to support Ukraine to ensure decisive military victory on the battlefield this year.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the additional support the Prime Minister has outlined today? I've had the privilege, I'm sure he has, of seeing firsthand the brilliant work our military is doing in Salisbury to train Ukrainians in defending themselves. We all support this work and the UK's role in the international drive to ensure that Ukraine has the weapons and the technology required to defend herself. Does the Prime Minister agree that continuing this international effort is the only way to ensure Putin's defeat?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the House may not all be aware that actually we have continued to train Ukrainian soldiers because it's something that we have done for years before the conflict started and something that we should be very proud of. But obviously we've intensified those efforts. Last year we trained 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers through Operation Interflex. This year the Defence Secretary announced that last year we'll be training 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers in addition to the Marines and Air Force pilots that I mentioned earlier. But the Right Honourable Gentleman is right to highlight this has been an international effort. One thing that is a mark of UK leadership in this particular area is that around a dozen other countries have all come here to the UK to take part in our training programs to support Ukrainian soldiers. Many members from around this House will have visited in their constituencies that effort. It's something that's making an incredible difference on the ground, and I know something that the President Zelenskyy is incredibly grateful for.
Keir Starmer.
I think the whole House would like to thank those involved in the incredible training that is going on. Mr. Speaker, before I entered this House, I had responsibility for fighting for justice in The Hague for victims of Serbian aggression. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when the war in Ukraine is over, Putin and all his cronies must stand at The Hague and face justice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right that we must hold those to account for the horrific crimes that they have committed. I'm proud that the United Kingdom has played, again, a leadership role in this regard, being one of the first countries to provide financial and technical support, putting investigators on the ground. We're shortly to be hosting a conference together with the Dutch. And also, one of the things I discussed with President Zelenskyy this morning is our support for the work of the ICC, where, thanks to the efforts of UK members, I'm hopeful that we will see the first indictments very shortly.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, across this House, we don't just hope for Ukraine's victory, we believe in it. And part of that victory must be Ukraine's reconstruction. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Russia should pay for the destruction it has caused through the wealth lying dormant in blocked Russian government assets?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are the third largest humanitarian and economic donor to Ukraine, £1.4 billion of support that we have provided through direct grant assistance and guarantees at multilateral lending organisations. And again, the House will remember we took a lead in imposing economic sanctions on Russian entities, including individuals and state-sanctioned assets. We've ensured the provision of funds here will be put in a foundation for reconstruction in Ukraine, and we are currently working with international partners through the legal process to use those assets to fund Ukrainian reconstruction. Of course, that's something that we all want to see, and we're working with our partners to achieve that.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a country, we've always been at our best when we stand up to tyrannical aggressors, threatening their neighbours and peace on our continent. That's why the Labour Party helped found NATO, and why our commitment to NATO is as unshakable today as it was back then. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we remain the leading European ally in NATO, as we always have done. We continue to increase funding in our armed forces by £24 billion at the last spending review to ensure that we maintain not just our NATO obligation to spend 2% of our GDP on defence, but also we participate in every NATO operation and remain the leading nation when it comes to contributions to NATO's Rapid Response Force and the NATO Readiness Initiative. But I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Global Combat Air Programme, including Team Tempest, is vital for UK national security and for the world-class aerospace cluster we've got in Lancashire, with many businesses in Burnley and Parian. This aircraft will protect UK skies, give the RAF the tools it needs for the future, and deepen our relationship with allies like Japan and Italy. So can I ask the Prime Minister, with a refresh of the integrated review taking place, to commit not just to the design and development of this aircraft, but to its production in Lancashire too, providing skilled jobs for generations to come for my constituents and residents all across the county of Lancashire?
Mr. Speaker, I was delighted to announce this landmark international partnership with Japan and Italy in December. Team Tempest partners already employ 2,500 people in the UK, with over 1,200 in the northwest. And as we are making more progress, we're going to continue to invest in skills and technology at the BAE Systems factory of the future in Lancashire.
Stephen Flynn, Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of my party, I'd like to send our condolences to all of those impacted by the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and also to welcome the exchange between the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister in respect of Ukraine. We all in this House are united in our condemnation of Vladimir Putin and in our hope for a better future for Ukraine. It will be an honour for all of us to listen to President Zelenskyy this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, in recent days, the former Prime Minister said that she did not regret her time in office. Does the Prime Minister regret her time in office?
I think they'll clear up which one, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to all my predecessors for the contribution that they make to public life, can I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that I know the whole House will be looking forward to hearing from President Zelenskyy at the conclusion of PMQs.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, hold on a minute. Let's reflect upon the damage that was caused. 30 billion wiped off the UK economy. Pension funds brought to the brink of collapse. The pound reaching parity with the dollar. And interest rates for mortgage holders right across these aisles soaring. Now, the former Prime Minister won't apologise for the damage that she has caused. So on behalf of the Tory party, will he apologise for her?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the first day that I took office, I said that mistakes had been made. But what we have done is to ensure that right now, he mentioned the pound at a multi-month high, borrowing costs restored back to where they should be, an economy stabilised, a clear plan to halve inflation and grow the economy. That's That's what the Conservatives are delivering in government, and we continue to deliver it as well for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Burghley House in my constituency is bidding to host the World Eventing Championships in 2026. This event is one of the pinnacles of the sport, and if we were successful in our bid, it would provide a massive boost to the local economy, as well as massive coverage for the UK on the global scene. Burghley has a formidable track record of success, having previously hosted 2 World Championships and 6 European Championships. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that Burghley would make a fantastic venue, and would he lend us his support so that we can be successful with the bid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are committed on building on our fantastic track record of hosting events like the Commonwealth Games, the Women's Euros and the Rugby League World Cup. I understand the relevant UK sporting authorities are looking at the location, and I'm sure that they'll be considering Burghley in my right honourable friend's constituency in the near future.
David.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate my party with the comments made about the unfolding human tragedy in Turkey and Syria, and with the warm words to welcome our ally, President Zelenskyy? He will know that this country and this House has total support for Ukraine's resistance to Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion, and it is a source of great pride that the British people have stood firm, united and unwavering in support of the brave heroes of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, when President Zelenskyy addressed this House last year, he asked that we treat Russia as a terrorist state. Since then, Liberal Democrats have been urging the government to fulfil that request by prescribing the Wagner mercenary group. They are doing Putin's bidding, carrying out atrocities against Ukrainians on a daily basis. So on this symbolic day, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister finally commit to prescribing the Wagner Group, a crucial part of treating Russia as the rogue state that it is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have taken a lead from the beginning of this conflict in sanctioning and taking action against those entities connected with the war effort in Russia and beyond. With regard to Wagner Group, the honourable gentleman will know that we have already sanctioned the Wagner Group in its entirety, as well as taking specific action against particular leaders, as he'll know. With regard to prescriptions, it's not something that we routinely comment on in public, but rest assured we continue to keep all of the prescriptions that we have under review.
Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 22 years ago this month, a good friend of mine died from AIDS. Had he been tested for HIV, I am confident that with the medical advances we have made, he would still be alive today. As my right honourable friend will know, this week is HIV testing, and I welcome the government's ambitions to end new infections by 2030. Can I ask my right honourable friend to thank the Terence Higgins Trust for their incredible work? And will he look to extend opt-out HIV testing to more areas of high prevalence so that we can help discover more undiagnosed cases?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his incredibly thoughtful question and express my sympathies to him on the loss of his friend, and join him in paying tribute to the work of the Terence Higgins Trust, as I know the whole House will also join me in doing. They do fantastic work, and I look forward to talking to my honourable friend about what more we can do to spread HIV testing and prevent more people from needlessly suffering.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government's fiscally illiterate electricity generator levy will choke off billions from future investments in renewable energy projects, the kind of projects that my Angus constituency excels at delivering. This investment will find its way to more favourable jurisdictions, putting thousands of green jobs in Scotland and our energy transition at risk. So will the Prime Minister commit to scrapping this environmentally and economically damaging tax, or will he instead confirm that he and this latest Chancellor know the price of everything and the value of nothing?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, I don't think it's right that because of a war, when energy companies are making windfall profits, that those profits should go untaxed. That's what our levy does. It's right that we recover those excess profits from energy companies as a result of the war and give that money back to the country in the form of support with their energy bills. What is economically damaging for Scotland is the SNP's refusal to acknowledge the existence and need for a transition, and that's to support the North Sea oil and gas industry, which we are proud to do.
Mr. Speaker, human trafficking is when you move people legally from one place to another, often with the promise of a job, and then force that person into prostitution or labour exploitation. It has nothing to do with people who come illegally here in small boats. That is smuggling. A third of all human trafficking in the United Kingdom occurs wholly within the borders of the United Kingdom. When I was chairman of the all-party group against human trafficking, we campaigned for an independent commissioner. One was appointed in 2014. However, since April of last year, we have not had one. This is unacceptable. Would the Prime Minister use his good offices to get one appointed urgently?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all his work in this important area. I'm happy to look into the particular position that he mentions, and I know that he is proud, as I am, of our world-leading modern slavery legislation, thanks to the former Prime Minister on these benches. It is a world-leading piece of legislation. We're showing an example about how to tackle this, but I'll make sure that we have someone in place to do the job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are now more than 50% more social care staff vacancy than last year. People are stuck in hospital beds with nowhere to go. In my Bath constituency, the Liberal Democrat Council and our local hospital, the RUH, are trying their level best and trying new innovative solutions to tackle the social care backlog, but the Prime Minister knows that this is a workforce crisis. We must recruit and retain social care staff. So I ask him, will he support the Liberal Democrat proposal to pay a higher minimum wage to social care workers to tackle the social care shortages that underpin the NHS crisis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we recently announced £14 billion more for health and social care, and in particular, part of that money will go to a new discharge fund to speed the discharge of people from hospitals back into their homes and in their communities. That money is already making a difference on the ground. We can see the numbers of people unnecessarily in hospitals are already reducing, easing the burdens in our A&E departments, and that comes on top of the money that we've invested to improve training, recruitment and development of our valued social care staff, and that will make sure that we can reduce vacancy rates, increase retention and get the workforce that we know we need.
Aaron Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, last month, together with fellow North Staffordshire MPs, I hosted an event, a tea party, to welcome Ukrainian refugees living in North Staffordshire. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking the sponsors, in particular Alton Towers, who hosted the event, the host families, and all the people of North Staffordshire who've made our Ukrainian friends so very welcome?
Well, I join my honourable friend in thanking Alton Towers, the other sponsors, and indeed all the families involved in putting on a tea party. I know many members from across the House will have done something similar. It's a wonderful way to show our support for the families that have come here. And again, something that the President this morning mentioned to me, how grateful he is to the United Kingdom that we have opened up our hearts and our homes to help those in his country that need our security and sanctuary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Big Brother Watch recently released a report into unaccountable government bodies such as the Counter Disinformation Unit, the Rapid Response Unit and the British Army's 77th Brigade. We're seeing huge swathes of public money being spent recording political dissent on social media under the guise of tackling misinformation. Politicians, including myself, the Leader of the Opposition, academics, activists and journalists and even members of public have been subjected to monitoring by Whitehall officials. This at the same time as we're waiting for the reporting of the Pitchford inquiry into questionable state surveillance on campaigns like the Stephen Lawrence campaign. So can the Prime Minister tell us how much public money is spent on these units and whether he thinks it's a justifiable thing to do in our democracy to spend public money in this manner? And could you also update the House on the progress of the Pitchford inquiry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to get back to the Honourable Lady on the Pitchford inquiry and indeed to give her an exact figure. But in general, I think certainly I on this side of the House believe very strongly in free speech and will make make sure that we continue to protect it wherever we can.
Bring it forward.
Mr. Speaker, Friday the 24th of February will mark 1 year of Russia's barbaric war in Ukraine. Thousands of people have been killed. Over 1,000 children have been killed or injured. So will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, call for a national minute of silence on that day so that all across the United Kingdom, the people here can show their unending support for the people of Ukraine?
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all the work that she has done in her previous roles to ensure that we provide appropriate support to those in Ukraine. I thank her very much for her suggestion. I'm sure it's something that we are considering as we speak, and there will be many other ways that we can mark that moment, not least as an international community continuing to show united condemnation and isolation of Russia.
Kerry McCarthy.
This week, Mr. Speaker, is Children's Mental Health Week. We know that adverse childhood experiences, whether that be growing up in poverty in the UK or indeed living through the horrors of war in the Ukraine, can have a lifelong impact on mental health. With the number of children in mental health crisis increasing year on year in the UK, does the Prime Minister believe he's doing enough to address the causes of childhood trauma?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable member for her question and let her know that we are doing more to make sure that the extra money we're putting into tackling mental health is particularly focused on young people, where we've seen a very startling increase in the number of young people presenting with mental health conditions that we all would like to arrest and reduce. That's why we're putting more mental health community support into schools and colleges across the country. That's being rolled out as we speak. And also just the other week we announced more money for crisis centres and urgent treatment centres in the mental health space in 100 different communities around the country, which will make a difference.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, this country's military and diplomatic support for Ukraine is strong and has strong support across the country. Less well known is a programme that has gone on for a decade, led by the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, to support the Verkhovna Rada, or Ukrainian Parliament. So does my right honourable friend agree that should this country host a reconstruction conference with the Ukrainians to discuss how Ukraine can win the peace, that the Foreign Office and the Westminster Foundation and other bodies can come together to see how we can help President Zelenskyy in the next stage of his country's development?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and as we look forward to hosting the reconstruction conference for Ukraine later this year, I'll make sure to take up his suggestion and involve all those organisations that can provide support to us and ultimately make sure that we can rebuild Ukraine in the way that it deserves.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government will want to help maintain popular backing in the UK for our support to Ukraine, including by helping people with their energy bills. More than 40,000 people across Devon live in homes that are off the gas grid. They're on the rural equivalent of prepayment meters. They need the money up front in order to pay for their heating oil and for their alternative fuels. The government announced an alternative fuel payment last September, but people in Devon are still waiting. What will the Prime Minister say to people who are off the gas grid and are waiting for their alternative fuel payment 5 months later?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we specifically considered people who were off the gas grid when designing the energy support schemes that we put in place, which is why the bulk of the support was delivered to those who had electricity meters to ensure it reached people like he mentioned, including many of my own rural constituents as well. That money should be getting to them. I'll make sure that it moves as quickly as possible. But we also put in place the local household support fund to provide discretionary funding that local councils can give to those households who are most in need.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Speaker, there's no doubt that the NHS is under enormous pressure across the UK, and despite record numbers of nurses and doctors, workforce remains a challenge. So can I welcome that for the first time the NHS will get an independently verified workforce plan? But we have to think long-term on buildings too, and so in that regard, can the Prime Minister look closely at proposals to rebuild Leighton Hospital, which is a campaign that has the support of thousands of residents in the South Cheshire?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that Leighton Hospital has been allocated over £44 million to address some of the immediate issues at that site, but I also know that the honourable friend is keen to ensure continued investment in his local hospital, and I know that the Department for Health are looking at more hospitals to join the new hospital programme, and I'm sure that they will have heard what he said, indeed the voices of his constituents too.
Liz Twist.
Mr Speaker, bus services are vital to our communities for work, for health, for school and for socialising. But in a matter of days, the buses that millions depend on will face another crisis with the ending of the bus recovery grant, and predicted cuts of 15 to 20% in mileage would be devastating for people across my constituency and others. Will the Prime Minister commit to extending the bus recovery grant so that communities in my constituency and many others are not left isolated? And will he ask the Transport Secretary to meet with me to discuss this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we recognise the vital importance of buses in our local communities, and that's why we're well on the way to fulfilling our commitment to invest £3 billion over this Parliament in our bus transformation, and that includes funding for local councils to subsidise unprofitable routes through the Bus Services Operators Grant, and recent money to help cap operator fares at £2 through the spring. And of course, we always continue to see how we can support bus services in the long term.
Mr Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that apprenticeships, such as those offered by the excellent South Essex College in Leigh-on-Sea, which I visited on Monday for National Apprenticeship Week, are a great pathway into work?
Mr Speaker, I completely agree with my honourable friend and pay tribute to her local college, particularly in National Apprenticeship Week. And I know something that we discussed just in Cabinet yesterday, we also have the country's first Education Secretary who herself was an apprentice, and it's something we're proud of.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in their condolences to the victims of the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria? Can I also reiterate my thanks to the Foreign Secretary for the speed of the initial UK response? Mr Speaker, but as we enter the third day of the earthquake, the bitter cold, unforgiving weather means that the likelihood of pulling more survivors from the rubble becomes less and less likely, and the immediate humanitarian impact is devastating. So can I ask the Prime Minister when we can expect an announcement on what further aid his government will commit to relief efforts, and what discussions he is having with his international counterparts to ensure our response meets the scale of this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady for her question and join her in paying tribute to the Foreign Secretary for the work that he's doing. So I spoke to President Erdogan yesterday to reiterate our commitment to provide Turkey with what support they need. Right now, that is search and rescue. She's right, we are in that vital window at the beginning of a situation like this, which is why our search and rescue teams are on the ground providing that assistance. The Foreign Secretary is also speaking to his counterpart at the United Nations to ensure that the humanitarian support that we can provide is well targeted. Also in Syria, where we fund the White Helmets, which are on the ground doing work. We're continuing to be in touch with everyone that we need to, and I can assure the honourable lady will continue to provide all the support that is asked of us.
I'm pleased to announce, as members will be aware, that President Zelenskyy will be addressing both houses in Westminster Hall imminently. That will require me to suspend the House's business in a moment. Members attending the address should go directly to the hall following the doorkeeper's directions. The House is expected to resume its sitting at approximately 2 o'clock. The division's bells will be sounded 5 minutes before the resumption. The House is now suspended. Order, order.
Well, the end of Prime Minister's questions and the suspension of the House of Commons in order to listen to President Zelensky's speech. He's not due to speak for about half an hour, actually. But our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here. We'll talk about the rather unusual PMQs in a moment. But let's bring you some pictures that we've just had in. Video from the social media account of President Zelensky's Interior Minister. This shows the initial greeting between him and the Prime Minister after he landed at Stansted Airport. Warm hugs coming off that RAF jet. We know that they then travelled by car together to Downing Street, where they also had the obligatory handshake outside the famous door before heading in to discuss British support for Ukraine. Well, once inside number 10, we could hear the applause from the staff who were inside, and then they then said a few words in front of the fireplace, talking about the support that the UK has given Ukraine.
There's freedom for society,
first of all, for your big support from the first days of full-scale invasion. Thank you so much. We are proud, really, and we have very good relations with Rishi and will prolong our dialogue, which will, I think, very important for security of our country and, of course, security for the world.
They then headed off separately to Parliament, with President Zelenskyy leaving first, ahead of his speech at 1 o'clock in around half an hour's time. And then the Prime Minister left to go to Prime Minister's questions, which we've just seen. And our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been watching it with me here in the studio. And Sam, one main story that they all talked about, Ukraine, all of Keir Starmer's questions about Ukraine pretty much. What did you make of it?
So I thought you got the best sense that politics as normal had been suspended today. We weren't expecting, we didn't have any advance notice that the visit from President Zelenskyy was going to take place this morning. We didn't know one was on the cards, and yet it has completely dominated the news agenda. Really, there are going to be only two stories all the way through the day on the news, and one is what's happening in Turkey and Syria, and the other is the visit by President Zelenskyy. Now, at moments of kind of where the world spotlight, certainly the domestic spotlight and the world is looking at the UK Parliament, at the House of Commons, it can feel that people rise to the occasion. Today was a lot of people just getting in on the act. I'm afraid, if I'm being completely brutal. There were lots of people making lots of points. I'm not sure that we learnt anything. I'm not sure that we shed much light on anything. What you did have was a sense that everybody was on the same page. There are no dissenting voices when it comes to Britain standing steadfast with its Ukrainian allies. And although President Zelenskyy wasn't in the viewing gallery, as perhaps he might have been, he's preparing for that 1 o'clock statement in Westminster Hall, which is a few metres away to both Houses of Parliament. You didn't get any sign of dissent, and the opposition Labour Party under Keir Starmer made it quite clear that they would be taking pretty much the same position that Rishi Sunak has done, which is the same position as Liz Truss, same position as Boris Johnson. But then beyond that, it was a session that basically saw a lot of people trying to come up with new angles on the same, on the same thing, and gently trying to underscore their own domestic political position. If you look at Keir Starmer's calculation tonight, I think that he will have decided that he wanted to use all of his 6-question allocation on this, because one of the goals, I think, at the moment for the Labour leadership is to underscore their hope that people start to see Keir Starmer not just as a domestic figure but as a global statesman. And that was one of the things behind that trip at the end of January to Davos, so you could see Keir Starmer on the world stage hanging out with fellow global leaders, even though he's an opposition party figure. And I think that by being able to effectively concentrate today just on this one global international affairs, international relations topic, he looks to do that again. They hope that has some beneficial effect. And also, cynically, there isn't going to be anything else on the news all the way through the day, so there's no point in making party political attacks. They seem to fall on deaf ears when the other leaders and the other MPs and PMQs made them. But then he sort of danced around the houses. He wanted to underscore Labour's commitment to NATO, sort of making a domestic political point. He also talked about what victory, or rather defeat, for President Putin would look like, and here I think you get quite quickly to a grey and uncomfortable area. Not that anyone really actually wanted to debate the difficult bits of the Ukraine crisis in the Commons chamber today, because he asked, do we have to keep going until President Putin accepts defeat, given that President Putin keeps on coming back for more? But in asking that question, he sort of highlighted that it's unclear what victory looks like. Does it involve President Putin still being in office? Or if, as Keir Starmer argues, he is still in office, won't he come back for more? But of course, President Putin staying in office in Moscow is not a subject that I think that UK politicians would want to pronounce on and make that a hurdle for victory or a goal, because of the possible incendiary consequences that kind of position would have. Similarly, talking about things like reparations having to fall to Russia for what's happened in Ukraine is sort of dancing around a sort of area that's theoretical but sounds good to the average punter, to the average voter. So I think that there was. And then by the time we got to Vicky Ford, dressed in Ukrainian colours, asking whether or not there should be a minute's silence for Ukraine, I think that rather summed up, I thought, some of the tone of bits of today. So in a situation where the House of Commons is united, I don't think that we learnt a great deal other than sending a strong signal of support, in of itself important, ahead of President Zelensky's address, but not one where politicians particularly stepped up and took us beyond the kind of the basics of what we already know.
OK, Sam, thanks very much.